George Cautherley was born during the Second World War. He spent the first years of his life as a POW at the Stanley internment camp, now Stanley Prison. George was sent back to the UK after the war for a short break, but he had lived in Hong Kong since 1947, and he is now a successful businessman in the biomedical business. George, welcome to the International Channel. You said you are fifth-generation Hong Kongers, and your father worked at the Hong Kong Bank, and your mother was a nurse before the war. Can you tell us more about Herd Street and the former French Mission building and your family links with Hong Kong?
Yeah, my mother was from the Herd family. Her mother was a Herd. So my great-great-grandfather was John Herd, who was one of the major American China traders. And he came out to China in 1841. They'd set up their own company. And they were here until 1875 when they went bankrupt. And they started off in Canton, which is their head office, and they had branch offices in Macau and Hong Kong. So in the 1840s, the Greater Bay Area existed, and Hong Kong businessmen were involved in it. And they moved in 1856, the head office to Hong Kong. And I think in 1867, they moved into what is known as the French Mission building. And Herd Street was named after them because they had their warehouse in that street. Because at the bottom of Herd Street is Hennessy Road, and that was the waterfront in those days. And so that's how we got out here, actually, through the Herds.
You said you're a Hong Kong Bank kid. Both of your parents worked for Hong Kong Bank, apparently.
That's right. My father joined the Hong Kong Bank in 1927, my mother in 1931. And my father had a number of relatives in the Hong Kong Bank. My mother had a number of relatives in the Hong Kong Bank. I think we've had 12 or 13 members of our family worked for the Hong Kong Bank, and several others were directors of the Hong Kong Bank back in the 1860s, 70s, that time span.
I remember Stephen Lam, a former chief secretary, said something about Uncle George, probably referring to your father. Is Stephen a relative, and how did you meet your late wife, Ruby?
No, Stephen's not a relative, and when he refers to uncle, he was really referring to me. Stephen's father was in the Correctional Services Department, or Prisons Department, and my wife Ruby's father was the AO for that department. And so they were all brought up together in Stanley, just like me. And so that's how I came to know him through my wife. And I came to know my wife through her brother-in-law, who brought her on a boat trip one day, and I was on the same boat trip.
I see.
Hello, George. I find your office is full of Feng Shui items. Can you tell us to what extent do you believe in Feng Shui?
Well, I maybe don't believe in Feng Shui very much, but what happened was many years ago, my wife's company was having some problems, irritating, not major, and one of her staff said, well, I know a Feng Shui master, why don't you ask the Feng Shui master to come? And he came and he gave his advice, and within a week, everything went fine.
Wow.
So I said, well, it can't do any harm. Let me try. And so for the last 30 years, just before every Chinese New Year, the same Feng Shui master has come to my office, and he sets the tone. There's Feng Shui around here as well. And my staff seem to like it. I don't know whether it works or not, but you know, you need every help you can get, and it's worthwhile.
Yeah, so the Feng Shui master will be your lucky man.
Yes, yeah. And one of my key elements is water. So you'll see, well, my home is full of water. There's water everywhere to protect me.
I understand that it is because of your wife to believe in, for you to believe in Feng Shui. So thank you for your introduction to us.
Other than talking about Herd Street, Hong Kong Bank kid, and his belief in Feng Shui, George Cautherley also brings us to the Stanley Military Cemetery. He mentions the stories of his great-great-grandmother and Vandeleur, Grayburn, who at the time of the war was the chief manager of the Hong Kong Bank.
So the picture I'm holding was taken in 1995, which was the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Hong Kong from the Japanese. And many people who had been in Stanley internment camp, including the two other people here, they were children together with me there. And this picture was taken on this part of the cemetery. And we came and walked around because all the gravestones, the rough gravestones, are all gravestones of people who died during internment camp. And then the round gravestones are the original military deaths. And then you have gravestones like these ones, the smooth ones, and they're dotted around here as well. And those are military people. I think some of them were soldiers killed during the occupation or before, during the battle. And right at the bottom of the cemetery, there are three, or maybe more, five collections of names of people who also died during the war, Chinese members who were killed during the war. And that's been installed quite recently, about 5 or 6 years ago they put that up. But this is a British military war graves commission cemetery. But, historical site. Yeah, but the Leisure and Cultural Services Department looks after it. And since they've looked after it, it's been kept in really good condition. They've done a great job on it. It's really very good. And I come here at least once a year because of my great-great-grandmother. And I come and see her and say hello. I've never met her, but yeah. So this is the grave of Vandeleur Grayburn, who at the time of the war was the chief manager of the Hong Kong Bank. And he was interned, like all of the rest of the Hong Kong Bank people, and he arranged smuggling of money into the camp so that people could buy things to supplement what they were given by the Japanese. And my father was one of the people who smuggled money in as well, but he was fortunate he wasn't caught. Eventually, one of the doctors, Dr. Talbot, was caught. And Grayburn immediately owned up and said, I set this all up, this is my organization. The money was approved by Hong Kong Bank in London, actually. This is interesting. And so he was put into the prison, and unfortunately he didn't survive, and he died in 1943, probably about a year or so after he was imprisoned, I think. So this is the grave of my great-great-grandmother, Bridget Purcell. So she was the mother of my mother's grandmother, so she's on my mother's side. And she and her husband came out here sometime in the early 1860s. He was a soldier with the British Army, although he was Irish, but there was no separate Ireland in those days. And she died of a tropical disease in 1864, but because she was the wife of a military person, she was buried here. And it's very fortunate that we were able to locate this grave because it's the piece of family history that I can visit any time, and I like to do so. And it's a nice quiet place in the cemetery. It's beautiful.